Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Red Knocking Projections. I'm Lucas and I have Eric here as always.
Hey guys.
And today we'll be discussing Biden's recent momentum in Congress, passing legislation, and in general. And we're going to be discussing how this impacts the 2022 midterm elections. And with that being said, let's get right into it.
All right. So let's start off with job growth. So what's going on here? So I think a record or the first time in a couple of months with such a high increase of 528,000 jobs that were created in the month of July. This is quite a lot of jobs, and this has caused unemployment to go down to historic lows of 3.5%. And during COVID, that was up all the way in highest points to between 7 and 8, if not even more at some points. And now that's all the way down to 3.5%. But even though unemployment is lower, a lot of people don't really feel like the economy is strong or a lot of people, are having good jobs. And that's because of, in more or less words, inflation. Um, they Americans really care about inflation and they're really still concerned about it. And even if, the economy is stronger, there are more jobs and their salaries are increasing, the aggregate prices that, inflation has caused to rise are still higher than, how fast their wages increase. That's kind of some basic economics there. So job growth and confidence, it's not seen really widespread and it's not really affecting like the average American worker. So, that's why they don't really notice this and give too much credit to Joe Biden. But objectively, this is a step in the right direction. Let's hope that, Joe Biden can keep these jobs for the American people and, help his party, increase their reputation so that, for them, they can win big in the midterms, or at least not win big, but win in general.
Right. So things are looking interesting on the economic side, but heading now to Congress is where we're especially seeing a lot of recent victories with regards to Congress, with regards to President Biden. For example, he's passed a lot of uh, legislation in the past few weeks, and it was kind of surprising actually, because this ended up it's looking like it's going to be a very productive Congress. What initially seemed to have like a slowish start, we're seeing a lot of bipartisan stuff that Joe Biden's passing that perfectly aligns with Biden's platform when he ran for president. He ran on a platform of unity and bipartisanship. And we're actually seeing a lot of that getting delivered. For example, although actually the first example is not a great example. The first example is the Inflation Reduction Act, which obviously was not bipartisan, but this was a pretty big win for Biden because this is a very big win for a lot of Democrats. I think a big reason why Biden's approval rating has been so low is he hasn't delivered, at least it seems, to progressive Democratic voters. This bill is a very good step for helping deliver for those Democratic voters. He was able to get the he was able to get the support of, there we go, moderate Senator Joe Manchin, and was able to eventually pass such a bill. So considering that, I think this will end up motivating a lot of Democrats to say, hey, President Biden actually did something. We have a reason to vote for him. So this is a very big thing to tell. Obviously, it was not bipartisan, but all the other bills we are discussing are bipartisan. So let's hand it over to Eric now.
So the next pretty big bill that was passed in Congress is the PACT Act. Don't really, I'm not really sure what it stands for, but more or less, it gives veterans compensation and recognition, and basically, yeah, financial compensation for any veterans that were exposed to any toxic chemicals. And this should have been passed a while back ago, said Jon Stewart. He played a really big role. He was one of those celebrity figures that kind of drove this home. And he commented on how this should have happened a while ago. But nevertheless, this is progress. And this is actually goes to the bipartisan cooperation that Lucas was talking about, because this bill was pretty bipartisan. And the fact that Biden got it signed in, along with everything else he got signed this week is definitely a plus. It's not going to hurt him. And, just the more that he would be able to get signed and sent out to the United States this week with everything else, the more it looks good on him. The more momentum that he has gained.
Right. And now that this is leads to another bipartisan act, the Chips Plus bill, which helps fund research, helps with chip manufacturing. So this bill actually is more of a long-term impact thing than a short-term thing, but it does show that he's trying to do something to address these problems. And then another act that happened a while ago, actually not a while, a couple months ago, was the Safer Communities Act, the gun reform legislation, the first time in decades that the U.S. has seen gun reform legislation occur, which obviously happened due to the unfortunate shooting in Texas. So this did a lot of things. It helped close the boyfriend loophole, helped increase background checks for younger people. So this is a big win for him for honestly both Democrats and Republicans because this makes it seem like he's doing something to address the issues happening in this country. And finally, we have some bills that are still on the table being discussed that haven't been passed yet in both chambers of Congress. But it looks like there's a decent chance they will be. And both are pretty bipartisan. And I'll start with the first. The first is the bipartisan electoral reform bill, which is a bill that Manchin and Collins were able to agree to. I think plus 10 Republican senators as well. This obviously happened after Trump falsely claimed that the election was rigged, claimed that Mike Pence could have done something. It hopes to amend the Electoral Count Act of 1887. And this is a pretty big deal because this finally gets tangible things done to prevent January 6th essentially from happening again. So this is another big bipartisan win. And then Eric is going to mention another one.
Yep. So another thing that's still on the table that's being discussed, but it's probably going to go forward is codification of gay marriage. So 47 House Republicans actually voted in favor of this bill. So it's quite bipartisan. And once again, goes back to bipartisanship and, how Biden, wanted to work and go through with his agenda, which was unity and bipartisanship with both houses and both parties. So because 47 House Republicans did vote in favor, this is definitely a step in the right direction. And a similar type of pattern will probably happen in the Senate so that Joe Biden can get this bill and sign it. So this is something that soon may not be on the table and could be added to the list of actual legislation that was passed.
Yeah, I do want to add though that we're still waiting on numbers in the Senate. It's honestly tough. It's unclear if it will pass. I think like 5 Republicans said they were going to vote for it, but gay marriage is a very popular thing across the country. I want to say like 70% of Americans believe that it's a settled issue. So if they can get that passed, that would be a very big win for them. Now to the third thing. This isn't really an achievement, but it's definitely something that's going to motivate Democrats to vote more. Is Roe versus Wade being overturned? Obviously, it's a very controversial, touchy subject, but Democrats across the country are very publicly angry. We're seeing protests everywhere. This is one of the biggest issues that is probably leading to this Democrat bounce, and it's what's going to motivate people to come out and vote in November. I'm going to toss it to Eric now to talk about what happened in Kansas.
Yeah, and just to add on to Lucas real quick, I think kind of the turnaround for Democrats kind of started with the overturn of Roe v. Wade. That definitely was like the catalyst for public protests and just basically like discussion and realization for Democrats that they got to vote. And this definitely sparked a lot of movement in that regard. And as an individual example, it's not exactly the best example for overall issues, but on a single issue like this, I think I talked about it in the previous video as well, but Kansas voted to keep abortions legal despite the state itself being really red. And this voting pattern could translate into other issues and just overall voting in the midterms, but there's no guarantee if people voting people voting on an overall evaluation, will translate. But it's definitely something that got out people to vote. So if enough issues that are personal to those people are on the table and out and discussed, and that's something they can vote on, they can definitely influence an election, even if it's in such a, traditionally partisan state.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure. It definitely shows that this was not a very popular thing across the country. I'm going to now hand it over to Eric now to discuss the impact of this on the midterm elections.
Right. So this is the question that we've all been waiting for. How is all of this and how are all of these accomplishments for Joe Biden have any sway on people going out to vote in November? So I think before we talk about that, it's important to talk about Biden's approval rating. And you see it's still low, 39% low. Despite everything that's happening and despite all the accomplishments that Biden had, once again, I talked about this when we were talking about inflation. A lot of people don't really see it, and a lot of people don't really feel it yet. And all they care about, though, is because of all they care about for now is the gas prices and inflation more than these recent wins. And they are objectively like very productive and good things for good things to pass. Americans still care about how expensive their gas is and how expensive their dairy products and their meat is. And if that doesn't go down, they don't really see and they won't really consider anything else because for them obviously it's a priority that they can afford to go somewhere and afford to eat.
I agree with that completely. And this is actually very interesting because you see two things happening. You see Joe Biden's approval rating staying fairly steady at a pretty low amount, and yet um you're still seeing an improvement on the generic ballot. And this is interesting because it shows that even though Democrats are more motivated to vote right now, they still don't really approve of Biden. So that kind of does show, I think part of the reason that Joe Biden's approval rating is lower than expected is because of Democrats. In the generic ballot, we saw for the first time Democrats being up in the generic ballot since last year, which is when, if you all recall, the New Jersey, Virginia elections happened, where Republicans took a very solid lead in the generic ballot. However, now we are seeing for the first time that they are leading. Of course, however, it's important to note that if Democrats want to hold the House, they probably need a D+3 generic ballot because the way districts are drawn, uh, they are more favored towards Republicans. So a neutral environment for them wouldn't be enough.
Right.
And ultimately, I don't think a D+3 is going to end up happening anyway. That seems a little bit out of reach for Democrats.
hmm And if they really want to capitalize on these accomplishments, maybe not to make it a D+3, but some sort of significant lead, they're really gonna have to spell all of these accomplishments out for the people during campaigns. All of these Democratic senators that have a chance to either maintain their spot in a competitive race or take a seat from a Republican incumbent, they really have to start talking about this because people are really gonna forget this. And if it's not talked about, obviously, why are they going to have this on the top of their head? So the campaigning game that they have to put on has to be very strong because they know they're up against a traditional red wave and they need everything in their power to overcome it. And communicating that is probably the most important thing to people, and how they communicate that is as crucial. So they really got to work and they really got to go out and spread the word about what's happening if they really want to have wins and take back or keep their house, their chambers.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's the big takeaway here. The big takeaway is that Biden does have time to improve his approval rating, but for now, uh, this is just a small bump. I think that if this is what we end up seeing going into election day, if the election was held today, I think it would be more of a red ripple instead of a red wave. Since at the end of the day, it's inflation and prices that all Americans are focused on right now. And
He
yep,
has to keep the momentum going. Lots of people will probably forget about these accomplishments. So if he keeps delivering and he keeps passing things, not only is he like actually doing something in government, but Democratic candidates have something to keep talking about. So the momentum he has right now has to keep going in order for Democrats to have some sort of chance in November.
right. So just to reiterate, we still think that Republicans are going to win the House, but their chances now are definitely much better than they were a year ago from today. So with that being said, thank you all for watching this video. If you like this episode, please hit like one. If you like our content, please hit subscribe. And we'll see you in our next episode tomorrow.
See ya.